literally take his good advice. Don't murder, don't steal, honor your parents. The list goes on.
And those are just the first 10. There are actually a total of 613 commands, all given to ancient Israel, found in the first 5 books of the Bible. In Hebrew, are called Torah.
Now, the word Torah is usually translated in English as law because it has all of these laws in it. And as you read through them, you wonder, am I supposed to obey some of these, all of these? I mean, what's the purpose of?
Well, that translation is kind of confusing because while the Torah has laws in it, the book itself is fundamentally a story about how God is creating new kinds of people who are fully able to love God and love others. And when Jesus taught about the Torah, he said that he was bringing that story to its fulfillment.
So walk me through the story and how it's fulfilled.
So the story begins with God creating humanity who rebels. And God chooses Abraham to bless all of the nations through his family, who end up in slavery down in Egypt, and so God rescues them. Then at Mount Sinai, God makes a covenant with Israel, like an agreement. And all of the laws that Moses gives to Israel are the terms of that agreement. They're like a constitution. So some of the laws are about rituals and customs that set Israel apart from the nations. Other laws are about social justice or morality. And by following these, Israel would show the other nations what God is like.
Okay, so the rest of the Torah is just a complete list of laws that Moses gives Israel?
No, the rest of the Torah just continues the story. And the 613 commands are only a selection from that original constitution. And even these have been broken up and placed at strategic points within the story. Now pay attention, because you'll see a really clear pattern. Moses gives the first laws to Israel.
Don't worship other gods, don't make idols.
And then right after that, there's a story of Israel breaking those very laws.
And they worship the golden calf.
And so Moses gives some more laws, and then you get more stories of rebellion. Some more laws, rebellion again, some more laws, more rebellion, and you start to see the point.
Right, no matter how many laws, they're just going to continue to rebel.
So at the conclusion of the Torah's story, Moses gives this final speech to Israel as they prepare to go into their new home, and he tells them, you guys, I know that you're not going to follow all of God's laws. You've proven to me that you're incapable. And Moses says the problem is that their hearts are hard, that they're going to need new, transformed hearts if they're ever going to truly follow God's law. And he was right. I mean, the story goes on to recount Israel's total failure.
They go into the land, they break all the laws.
Right. Now, the next section of books in the Jewish tradition are the 15 books of the prophets, and they reflect back on the story. For example, Ezekiel, he said that if Israel was ever going to obey the law, God's Spirit would have to transform their hard hearts into soft hearts. And Jeremiah said that's when obedience to God's command wouldn't feel like a duty, but they would be written deep in their hearts. And Isaiah, he promised a future leader, Israel's Messiah, who will lead all of the people in obedience to the law. Now, in Jewish tradition, all of these books together are called the prophets, even the historical books, because they're continuing the story told from the perspective of the prophets.
Okay, so we have the law and the prophets, and they're telling one connected story about God's desire to bless the whole world through a people, Israel, who it turns out needs a new heart.
Yes, and Jesus saw himself as continuing that story. So he agreed with the law and the prophets when he taught that it's out of the human heart that come the most ugly parts of human nature. It's like the default setting of our hearts is opposed to God's law. But Jesus also said that he came to solve that problem, and in his words, to fulfill the law.
So what does he mean there, to fulfill the law?
Well, first he said that the demand of all of the laws in the Torah could be fulfilled by what he called the great command, that we are to love God and to love others.
So that seems pretty easy. I mean, we all want to love.
Well, we think we want to love. But Jesus showed how love is far more demanding than we realize. So he quotes the law, do not murder. And he says, yes, not killing someone is a very loving thing to do. But then he also says that when you treat someone with disrespect, or when you nurse resentment against them, you're also violating God's moral ideal, because you're not treating that person with love. And so Jesus said true love ought to extend even to our own enemies. So even though this command seems very simple, Jesus showed how our hearts are not currently equipped to fulfill even this basic command of God to love others.
That's kind of a downer.
But where Israel failed, Jesus brought the story to its fulfillment. As Israel's Messiah, he fully loved God and others, and he showed all of the nations what God is truly like. He did this through his acts of compassion and mercy, and ultimately by loving his enemies even unto death. And after his resurrection, he told his followers that he would send God's Spirit to transform their hearts so that they could follow him and fulfill the purpose of the law, to love God and to love their neighbor. So this fulfills the story of the law and the prophets, or in the words of the Apostle Paul, the one who loves fulfills the law. This video was made possible by over 1,300 people who chipped in, and most of those are monthly givers to the Bible.
There we go. All right, that's a pretty cool video. So my name is Steve. I'm really glad to be here with you tonight. I've been involved in confirmation here at Salem for many, many years, probably since before you guys were born. I was doing some part of confirmation from one point or another. And I love coming and teaching, and I love talking about our faith and just understanding what it is, understanding how it changes from when you were really little to as you're growing up. My faith changes all the time. Every couple of years I look back and I think, wow, I used to believe this, but I kind of feel a little more strongly about this now. I just feel like I'm walking the path that God wants me to walk. And part of that is coming here and telling you guys about stuff. Very complicated video. There's a lot of stuff that very densely packed. I'm going to kind of refer back to it sometimes. I'm going to teach you a little slower and a little more in summary fashion. But I think it's an excellent video. I think your parents, me, our pastors here at Salem could watch that video and get something out of it. It's really excellent. But it starts off with this talk of the law. It talks the law and the prophets. I'm going to talk mostly about the law because that's the subject of this lesson. So who can tell me what a law is? Yeah.
It's like a rule that you're supposed to follow or someone wants you to.
Okay. Does that anybody have a different angle on that, or is that pretty much what everybody thinks? It's like a rule. And there's consequences to not following rules, like what?
You get grounded.
Get grounded. Okay, so those are rules that were made up by who?
My
Your
parents.
parents, right? They're the ones making up the rules and observing the rules and giving out the consequences. What if you went to the store and stole something and you didn't pay for it?
Grounded.
Grounded? What if I went to the store and paid and didn't pay for it? What would the consequences be there? I might go to jail, right? And who would be enforcing that? Not my parents, the police.
I'd be jail, and when I come back, I'd be grounded.
Well, I don't think I'd be grounded. I'd be in trouble, but not from my parents, from my from society. Okay, so the rules that we're supposed to follow. I've got an idea of what we're going to start off with. There's pencils over there and 3x5 cards in that little bin. Everybody grab one of each. Each of you has an opportunity to write a new law.
Oh, yeah.
Is it going to be a law that's going to make life better? Probably, unless you have an enemy that you really want to write a law about. I'm not sure what you want to do. Just think about it. What's a law? Then this is a fun activity. It doesn't have to be the most profound thing I've ever heard in my life. It's a fun activity. Think of a law and be ready to share that in a minute. I'll give you a minute and a half. Maybe something you wish was illegal, maybe something you wish was mandatory. Some people had to do. Because we're going to hear about both kinds of laws, things you can't do and things that you must do. Has somebody already written down one just to get us started? What's your first idea? Make wars illegal. Okay, so like to turn this into a law, it would be war is against the law, right?
Yeah.
No war.
No war.
No, I like that. I like that law. No war. Yeah.
Can I add on to that?
Yep.
Maybe instead of no war, it could be what leads up to war that makes it legal, like invading a country, something.
Okay. It's getting kind of fuzzy. No invading, no.
I'm not exactly sure, but
Yeah.
around.
I could start with no invading. let's say you want to do other nations or just leave it at no invading. All right, we'll just leave it there. Who's got another one? Oh, yeah, go ahead, please. Don't emotionally hurt others. Hurt others. Like that law. Who's got, okay, Kansas City.
I have 4. I have 1 no bowling.
Give me your favorite. Give me your first one then.
I do 4.
We'll see. Let's see how far we get.
First one is no bowling.
I'm sorry?
No bowling.
No bullying. All right. I bet that's a law already at your school, right?
Yeah, but no one follows it. Yeah,
Alright.
no one does. Nobody follows it.
Okay.
Some of my most traumatizing memories from a bully-free school.
Oh, what?
Bully-free school.
Free.
You know, bully-free.
Oh, really free school where they, I see.
My worst memories is writing up a document asking people for help because I was being bullied, and then sharing it with 2 people, and then more people, and then they like lost those people, and they added more people to the project, and obviously our big brain about it,
Well,
and like it was.
did it change anything?
No,
No,
yeah,
okay.
because he may have mentioned a few people in our grade that
Oh.
they're bullying. Yeah, and then maybe one of his brothers were added onto his group chat. Yeah.
Here, let me get us back. Oh, hold on just a minute. You had something you were going to say.
I was gonna add on to the war thing. Nothing like unfounded, without reason.
Without reason. Ooh, it's getting a little fuzzy,
It's a little
maybe.
but
I think Putin thinks he has a reason.
without
After
unfounded.
A good reason?
Wasn't his
Sure.
reason because he thought he was threatened by Ukraine?
No, I
I
think that
think
he was
his reason was because he
I
wanted.
know. I think
Yeah.
that he was. I think that he was scared that he was going to like lose control because he doesn't want. He doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO. He doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO. They already got independence from Russia. But he doesn't want them to join NATO, so he started threatening to invade. Well, he has, but I
What
think
did
he
you
just
think?
wants control over Ukraine again, so that he can have that power because he already doesn't have enough.
Also, there's a lot of points.
Okay, we're gonna get back to the lesson. Yes. Did you have a law for us?
Oh no, mine was.
No War II. Good. It's a good one. Okay, one more. Let's have one more.
Oh, can I just like 3 more?
You can do. Let me hear one more.
No, I can't. I have to go 3.
All right. Let's hear them.
Okay. 1, it's illegal to fight the U.S.
To what?
It's illegal to fight the U.S.
Fight
That's very specific.
Yeah, it's
us? You mean us?
true. You must treat chicken with respect.
Amen.
Yes. And
Okay.
3, homework is illegal.
Homework is illegal. I'm gonna write that one down. Oh, no, I think I'm right. Just no homework.
Schools don't think we have lives outside of school.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm up all night.
Exactly. Especially when you have a project assigned 3 months ago and you didn't do it yet.
Last night I got
it takes 3 hours to do.
I got 3 hours of sleep last night. I had a lab report and I had to work on a policy memo for the Ukraine Russia.
Wow.
I wrote a.
So am I hearing a favorite like down here near the bottom? Do you think this is?
Homework's my favorite so far. Oh no, entering
No, look
people's
at the chickens. Look at the chickens.
Oh,
Look at
yeah,
the chicken
my-
one.
I didn't write all those
That's
down.
directed towards my parents.
Chicken was
Yeah.
kind of the no bully.
Oh no. Okay. Okay.
What was the chicken one? 3 chickens with respect.
All right. So let's can you give me the next slide there? All right. So we talked about which one we like best. It's kind of homework. Well, no war. I think we all kind of like that one. We had some good ones. I think they're all kind of covered to some degree, but not very effectively, probably in the laws that we know about. So just in general, what are laws? I mean, you said rules. Why do we have laws?
So that people won't do stupid stuff and end up in jail. So that like to keep the people running, whatever it's called, society running,
Okay,
doesn't fall apart. Because
let's get in there.
what if it's like if like everyone's driving at different speeds down on the interstate and everyone's crashing into each other.
Okay.
People could like die, so that's why we have laws.
It might not be
Here-
People say.
People say, okay, yeah.
So your country doesn't seem weak and Sweden will invade you.
Okay. All right.
Oh, it's really just like
Prevents problems. Okay. I like what you said about kind of it helps people cooperate, keeps them behaving or something like that, keeps us able to have a civil society, I think I'd say, right? So I don't know, I had some thoughts about this. Seems like most laws are negative, meaning like you cannot, I think everything we had on here was no, don't, no, no. Is that how you think of, I kind of think of rules kind of being like that most of the time, is no, 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 don't do this, don't do that, do this. Can you think of any laws that are like, you must do something?
You must wear socks daily.
Not a law.
No. Imagine walking on the beach with your socks and you're going to
Okay.
the water. Imagine swimming with your socks on, okay?
I would.
Plus?
No, thank you.
Socks on? No, but I still would.
Okay, think again. Can you think of a law that is something that we must do?
You must vote when you're 18. That's what I
It's not a law. Don't have to.
Yeah.
Don't have to.
You must wear clothes in public.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
No,
But that's kind of a not, don't be naked, right? I mean, it's kind of a not
No,
thing
but
still.
you must wear clothes in public.
Okay. All right. All right. You have to pay your taxes. Again, kind of a negative thing. I have to pay my taxes. I'm not happy about it. But yes, you must do this. And why do we have to pay taxes?
To keep the economy running.
You must not.
To contribute again, right? To contribute to society.
You must be happy. I don't know. It's
Not a
very
law.
positive.
Not a law. All right, let's go to the next page. All right, so we kind of talked about, I think we kind of covered this first one a little bit. Some of the laws in our schools, our cities, our states, things get more broader, right? I mean, you have laws in your school that aren't really laws in the city, right? About, I don't know, lining up, doing your homework things. I don't have to do any of that because I'm not in school anymore. But I do have to pay my taxes to my city and then my state and then my country and those things. So they kind of broaden out these laws that help us like behave, not hurt each other, and contribute to each other's well-being and society's well-being. And then what you kind of saw in the movie there that we watched, the video that we watched, is God has laws for us too. It's same sort of thing. Rules, don't do these, do these things. And what's the purpose, do you think, of those laws? Get us close, okay, to be in better relationship with Him, to be closer to Him. What?
To not have a hard black heart like those people in videos.
That would be doesn't.
I don't know. I'm looking to think of right now.
So what we saw in the video, I'll get back to in a minute, but the reason that people couldn't follow God's laws was because they had that hard heart.
Yeah.
But it's the law isn't to. You're kind of getting ahead of me a little bit with that,
Can't
but
people just like, it's simple. Just like don't bow in front of a cow.
that was one of God's laws.
Oh, in Arizona,
Don't worship
in
the
Arizona,
animals. They're gonna want worship.
in Arizona,
One at a time.
in
One at a time.
Arizona, you can't. Your pet donkey can't. In Arizona, you can't have your pet donkey sleep in a bathtub.
There are some silly laws. I remember reading the book. Sometimes they had some really silly laws.
In
Like-
Arizona, you can't have your pet donkey sleep in a bathtub. You can't.
That are really old. Like,
They're thinking about passing a law in schools that like bans any talk about like racism in our past stuff. It's kind of silly.
In our school, you can't talk about politics, but on the history.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's like half a unit right there gone.
Right.
That's the whole point
Yeah,
of
they're
history,
gonna
learning things
pass
you don't
a
forget.
law. Yeah, my school that's like half a semester.
Yes.
That's all my.
Oh, did
That's
you
all
know?
my.
Did you know that in Kentucky it's illegal to dye chicks different colors on the skirt?
What?
Why would you dye the chicken?
That would have worked really well here. Why didn't anybody come up with that?
And on.
Okay, so let's focus back on the topic. So we said one reason God has laws is to help us have a better relationship with Him. What's the other set of laws? What's another reason? Not that much different than why our schools and cities and states have laws too. Balance with what? Balance of what to what? Like, so what did we say some of our laws were for? We're not just to not
People can make a profit, not die.
To keep people in check.
keep people in check from doing like hurting each other.
Murdering each other.
So let's. So I think.
People to make a profit.
So it's not just for us to have a better relationship with God, but for us to also have a better relationship with each other, right? Because God doesn't just care about us with Him; He wants to see all of us flourish together and make of this earth what we want of it, what God had planned for us.
He wants us to see all of us together like Russia and China.
He wants us to all live together with loving each other and understanding each other.
Russia and China made an allegiance against the U.S.
I'm not going to get into politics.
That was really random.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next slide. So there are laws in the Bible that God teaches us laws to be in better relationship with Him and to be better in relationship with each other. Did we do creation yet? Have we talked about the Genesis story and Adam and Eve?
I read like.
Great. So what do you remember about that story? What, just in general? Yeah.
God created the earth.
Right.
And then he created humanity,
Mhm.
and Adam and Eve, and then there was a fig tree, and he gave them one law: do not eat the thingy on the tree. But if they told them to eat the thingy, and they ate it, and then God got mad, and then God took away the feet from the snake, and then there was Cain, and Cain killed his brother.
Okay, wait, you're getting ahead though. You don't have to go that. Just that first part. Oh yeah, that's good. That's good. Yep.
It's kind of off topic.
That's okay. So you kind of just covered this. The first thing I had is when God created Earth and put.
Is there a law that nobody's broken?
There's like 600.
Nope.
No.
One of the ones is you can't have a tattoo. And
I draw on my hands all the time.
Not a lot. Okay, so focus again. So we said exactly what you just said. God created Earth, put all creatures and humans on Earth, and said, "My only rule is don't eat from that tree." Do you remember what? But
there's a fig tree.
it's kind of a poem, right? It's kind of a story that's not meant to be interpreted literally. Okay. So how do we interpret that creation story of God creating all this, putting us in its place, being in this perfect relationship with us, where we can read in Genesis that God walked the earth with us. We heard His footsteps. So we were in very close relationship with God. An amazing situation, just the way God wanted it to be. And God said in the poem that we have for creation, He said, "Don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil."
Why would he make that in the first place?
Good question.
If
That's a
you
very
don't have
good
a
question.
reason to trust him.
It's because God wants us to be free and make choices. And He wants us to make the choice to go His way and to believe in Him and have faith in Him and follow Him. But we don't have to do that. Okay? He wanted two things from us. He wants our faith and our love, and you can't make someone have faith in you and love you. Even God. I mean, God could make a robot, I guess, that loves Him, but that's not what we understand as love, right? That's not what we think of as faith and love. It's something programmed into you. It's a choice. It's a thing willingly given. That's what God wanted from us. And so He put us in perfect relationship in the perfect Garden of Eden and said, "Come, stay with me. Stay with me. You're free to not stay with me, but please stay with me." And the fall, the eating of the forbidden fruit, was all about choosing another way, right? Deciding that we don't want to stay with God. We think there's something better in our life, that God does not have the best plan for us, that there's other things that we should be doing that maybe are better, or whatever we have in our minds. And so we want to pursue that. And that's the story. That's the story of the first rule. It's very simple. Don't eat of this fruit. Or in other words, don't go your own ways. Come with my way. Stay with God.
Humanity would be very different.
I think so. Because God said even don't. There,
I don't think clothes would have been
So things like sickness, yeah, we didn't even know. Sickness, death, maybe. Who knows what God really had in store for this perfect place where he had us. But it's not the broken world that we're in today. I believe that. So we kind of messed up, and our actions had consequences. You talked about it, what happens in Genesis 3. Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden. They're saying this beautiful place where you had everything you needed, you can't be here anymore. In fact, you can't even be in relationship with me. I don't walk this earth anymore. I will be present. I will see what happens here, but our relationship is broken. Our relationship is broken now. And that was the consequence of the actions of deciding we wanted to go our own way instead of God. You notice I'm saying we and not Adam and Eve? I'm not pointing my finger at two people that were in the garden.
But they did do it. They were the only people in the garden.
Well, again, I think it's a
There
poem.
was a snake. And there was a lost his feet. Now, and that's why his snake slithered. That's why his snake slithered.
So usually when we talk about the story of Genesis in this class, we talk about it as being poetry and something that's not literally true, but there's a lot of truth in it. And so it has to be interpreted, just like a poem. It has to be interpreted to be understood. And so when I read about, I'll talk about Adam and Eve kind of as if they were people, but the lesson that I'm supposed to get, the interpretation I'm supposed to learn from Genesis, is it's a story about all of us. It's a story about mankind in general to this day, that we still struggle to choose God's way each day instead of our own. And that's the story I get. That is that one lesson that God had for us. It still exists. Choose my way, choose God's way instead of a different way. Anyway, so actions have consequences. In fact, God said something about that on a slide that's coming up. But as the video said, God didn't give up on us. God called Moses and called Abraham and people and gave us new laws, the 10 Commandments. And then in Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy gave us more and more laws. And then the story, as the Bible talks about it, and that video said, we keep kind of failing. Let's get the 10 Commandments. You kind of know what these are. So again, have no other gods but me. So basically God is saying, I'm God, no one else is. Don't be listening to false gods. Don't be setting up false idols, things to pray to in belief. And this is coming from a society where there were a lot of false idols, a lot of gods that weren't real, which led people to do very terrible things. And God is just saying, look, stop all that. I'm the only God. Don't pray to anybody else. Don't follow anybody else's instructions except God's. And then said, in fact, I'm so set apart. I'm so special that don't be using my name and saying that somebody else or don't pretend to be me. Don't use my name when you're not speaking to me or lifting me up or representing me in the right way. That's what it means when say using the Lord your God in vain. We think of that as cursing, probably as saying dirty words, but it's really much more about using God's name in bad reasons, not good reasons. All right, misrepresenting him. Okay, those were all bad. Those were all negatives, right? We talked about these all. Here come a couple positives. Keep the Sabbath day holy, which is just saying take that seventh day every week and set it apart. Don't make it like every other day where you work and do the normal things that you do. Set that apart and use that for rest. Use that for fellowship, for things that are in my name and not in the world's name. Honor your father and mother. There's a positive thing, right? Don't tear them down. Assume that they're doing what they can for you, that they deserve your respect and your honor. And then we get to some negatives again. Don't murder. Don't commit adultery. Don't steal. Don't bear false witness against your neighbor. Don't lie about what your neighbor's doing or things like that. And don't covet. You know what that means? Don't be jealous of what other people have. Don't want what they have. Yeah. These are all tendencies that we have, right? I mean, I think y'all probably don't do a lot of murdering yet. Hopefully never. I never have, to my knowledge. But the coveting thing, that's a tough one. When you see a really nice car or somebody's really nice big house, and you think, gosh, I wish I had that. But it's kind of God's telling us you don't understand people's circumstances, and God will provide for you what you need. You don't need to be thinking that there's better than what you have. All right. So we all know the story about Moses and the Ten Commandments. And as soon as Moses brought these down from Mount Sinai, and went back up to hear more to talk with God some more, all these started getting broken. They were making idols. They were believing in other gods. Probably a lot of this other stuff going on. So I mean, we again, it's easy to point to Moses' people, but we all mess up daily. And so very quickly, this was not sufficient. Go to the next. Let's see. So we kind of get into this cycle of we keep failing. So it brings us to this idea of sin. You've heard that word before, probably in church. We don't dwell on it too much as Methodists, but it's definitely something that we talk about. Do you know what sin is? Give me a guess.
Bad.
Bad?
Bad.
What do you think?
Bad part of the soul.
The bad part of your soul.
Bad things.
Interesting. What else?
Lots of bad things that you do that are bad.
Okay, you're getting.
To make it name for it.
Yeah, you're getting there. You remember what we're talking about? We're talking about rules, right? It's like breaking the rules. All right. So let's go on to the next. So really, sin is kind of not following God's laws. I mean, it is a religious term. It's not following God's laws, and that means both doing what you're not supposed to do, and then not doing what you're supposed to do. If you're in church, we pray a prayer about forgiveness before communion, where we say, "Forgive us for not doing the things we should have done, and for doing the things that we should not have done." Are you in here or out?
I'm in here.
Okay.
I'm on the Zoom.
Oh, okay. Welcome. All right, and then I think I've got one more. All right, and then in Genesis, God told Adam and Eve that the consequences of sin is death. And again, because it's in that early period, I mean, death is real. We all experience death on earth. It's a thing that happens all the time. But I also think that's a broader term: death in our relationship with God, death in our relationship with each other. I think that word death has a lot of meaning.
Wait. So Adam and Eve were basically invincible. They couldn't die.
Okay, so I told you two things. The first thing is this was poetry, and it needs to be interpreted. So I don't have an answer to were those two people invincible and would never die, because
the consequence is death.
Yes.
That means that we all die. So could they just not die?
That was the second part of what I was going to say to what you asked me, is maybe God did not intend death to be a part of this world. Maybe all the things that we experience in the death of relationships, the death of relationship with God, with each other, the death of our physical selves, was that supposed to happen? Was God's perfection or God's good world that he put us in, was any of that supposed to happen? I think it's an interesting question. I don't have an answer to that. It's a mystery. I think it's an interesting question. But we sin, we have death in this world. So it's kind of a moot point. But I think when we get to the end of this and we talk about God's redemption of the world and God's and heaven and those concepts, we don't hear about death anymore, do we? So in the state at the end where God has reconciled everything to the way he would meant it to be, death is no more. And so maybe from the very beginning that was not supposed to be death. It's an interesting question. All right. Let's go ahead. So again, this Old Testament story, this is one of the things that they walk through in the video that we watched at the very beginning. We had creation in one law. Go God's way. It's very simple. Go God's way, not your own way. All right. And we did not do that. We failed. And the consequences of sin is death. And so we live in a broken world that is full of death in relationships and death in real physical nature. Yeah.
So what if somebody
Well, see, the thing is, there are none of us. I mean, there's this idea called original sin in the church and in faith, and it's the idea of none of us are even born perfect. We're born into a broken world, into a series of broken relationships of people with God, and so God gave us the world with creation. The part of that Genesis story is that God gave the world to us, and so when we decided not to follow God way back when, we took the world with us. So all the brokenness, all the death, the what you're describing, we all live in that broken world now. And so there's never a chance for us to be in that perfect state. You had your hand up for a while.
I'm sorry, this is kind of off to a dark topic, but let's say you can't murder people, and that's like a really big sin.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if you like murder yourself? Would that still be a sin because you're dead?
Yes.
Oh. Well,
yes, God respects all of our lives.
That sucks.
And he did not mean, you don't murder other people, but you're fine. No, God loves every single one of us and did not want to see us murder ourselves either. Your question.
For stillborn babies and babies that haven't even been able to sin or have a chance to do any of that, and when they die, is it the same thing for them, or is it
Well, you're kind of getting ahead of what happens, right? You're talking about your soul maybe, and so heaven and all this reconciliation. So God, you're like many lessons ahead, but there is the end of the story, and that we're not there yet, is that God reconciles the world and all of us and everyone who's been and everyone who ever will be to his intention, which is the sort of thing you're talking about. Did he intend for stillborn babies? I don't think so. That doesn't sound right, like what God would want in this world, right? So that's just another part of the brokenness of this world that we live in. It's really sad and an unfortunate consequence of the fact that we've chosen our own way. And God honors that. I mean, that's the problem. That's the choice. When God gives us a choice to go his way or not go his way, God honors our decisions. And so when we, even as the world, have decided to go our own way, God respects that choice. I mean, he doesn't give up, and we're about to get there. God does not give up. He keeps trying. He keeps reaching out. He keeps asking us to get back in that right relationship with him. So that's the beginning of the redemption story. What I was talking about earlier was the end of the redemption story. Jesus comes back, rights all wrongs. People who, the resurrection, we talk about that. All things that were not supposed to happen get reconciled to the way they were supposed to be. Stillborn children were not. I don't believe that's God's will. God did not mean for that to be the way things were. Yeah, quickly. Well, hold on to that. Maybe we'll get back to it. All right, so we said God does not give up on us. That is the key point of the Bible. As you read through, God is continuously calling us back. We keep rebuffing as humans, as the world. We keep rebuffing God and saying, no, we'll go our own way. And God calls us continually back. Yes?
So with the no murder, it's maybe you go fishing and you catch a fish or you kill a deer or something like that, then
Well, tradition has been, the answer to that has been no, traditionally. I think you will find people who believe that the answer is yes, like vegetarians and such. I don't know the right answer. God knows the right answer. I don't know the right answer. In the Garden of Eden, the story that we're told is that the lamb laid down with the lion. There was not even any killing in the animal kingdom. Now, that's a traditional story. Okay, that has to be interpreted. What does that mean? I believe that means God had a purpose and a plan for everything, and that it's so different than what we're living now that we can't even understand it. That this idea that we shouldn't even be fishing and killing fish, and there are hungry people. There are people that need to do that to eat, and I believe that their lives are important. So I can't condemn that behavior. I don't necessarily myself think that's what it means to not murder. I think God's kind of talking about our relationship with other people. But I don't know that I have the right answer about that. Quickly.
I kill a lot of people in video games. Does that count?
I don't like that. No, they're not real people, so no, it doesn't count.
But like, what if it does? What if he died and they got like, oh wait, you killed all these video game characters?
Well, then you'll have to answer to God for that.
Bad.
Fortunately, Jesus came along and he had some things to say, not directly about video games, but about sin. And we'll get there. All right. But so what we said was, what you saw in the video was that there kept being these laws established. And the first 5 books of the Bible are all about these laws being established, and then stories of us just ignoring the laws. And some of those laws are things that you would, the murder and the stealing and things like that you would realize. Some of the laws are a lot more kind of vague, like you cannot wear 2 different kinds of cloth together. You can't wear something woven from a wool and something woven from cotton, something like that. No eating shellfish. No eating pork. I mean, you might recognize this if you have any Jewish friends. A lot of Jewish friends still observe these laws. No mixing milk with meat when you're cooking. No eating of anything that's touched blood. You've heard of kosher food from the Jewish people. That there are all these rules about food, about that being kosher, and they still observe those practices. Any idea why they do that? Yeah. I just said the Jewish people still observe these rules, and I'm going to get a little bit to why we don't.
I honestly just eat anything that tastes good.
It's mostly like lobster, shrimp, things like that. I don't know. I guess oysters, yeah. I don't think Jewish people eat that either. I don't think so. So anyway, some rules that I think we would consider strange, but if you look back at history, pork was a very dangerous thing to eat. Pork was filled with I can't remember, all of a sudden I forgot the name of the parasite, but there's a parasite that's in pretty much all pigs, that unless you can cook it to the very precise temperature that we have the ability today to cook, you could die from eating pork, and a really bad, horrible death. Shrimp and shellfish and things like that are the same thing. They're not always clean. And a lot of the laws here are about cleanliness, and therefore they're for people's good, for people back in 2,000-3,000 years ago that didn't have the kind of technology to understand what is wrong with pork, what's wrong with oysters, what's wrong with shrimp, how do we cook them properly, all these sorts of things. So, but they're for our own good, all right. And some of them I couldn't explain why you can't wear cotton and wool together. I have no idea why that is, but there was some. I mean, if I asked a Jewish rabbi, he would probably be able to tell me what the story is there. Yes.
Here's a theory. Maybe God really likes pigs. He's like, if you kill these guys, it gets really sad, so you better not.
Yeah.
Thinking about the wool and cotton thing,
So God had a fashion sense, and you kind of offended that. Maybe that was it.
Yeah.
That might have been it. Maybe that was it. So anyway, now we have this thing where Moses and the prophets, and we haven't talked about what prophets are yet. Prophets are the people who speak God's truth, and a lot of times it has the connotation of being able to see into the future, but really it's about seeing the heart of God, being able to see what God really, and say to other people what God intends. And Moses and these prophets were saying, the laws are not the problem here, because this is how you are in right relationship with God and with each other. There's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong with the people's hearts? Our hearts get hardened about each other because we ask the question, who's your neighbor? And we were thinking, the person that lives across the street, the friend on my softball team or whatever. Really, the neighbor is everyone, is your worst enemy, is your neighbor. And so when God is saying, treat your neighbor with kindness and with love, we think, I'm not going to do that. That's, he wouldn't treat me that way, so I'm not going to do that. It's our hearts. It's in our hearts. We have this idea that, well, God says that, but I think I know a little better about my enemy than God does, which is ridiculous to say, I think. But anyway, the Moses and the prophets also said God will not give up on us. He still speaks. He still wants our hearts. He still wants our love, our faith. And so God has a rescue plan. Any idea what that is? Or who that is? That was a hint. Yeah. Yes. Jesus will be the rescue plan. Let's go to the next slide. All right. So we've been talking about the Old Testament. So we've been talking about mostly the Torah, what the first 5 books of the Bible, what the Jewish faith calls the Torah, and I could do a whole lesson on that, but I won't. And these stories, the Old Testament is filled with stories of people struggling to live by these laws. Whether it's the hardness of their heart or the difficulty of the laws and things, Moses and the prophets said, well, it's our fault. It's not the law's fault. Anyway, the problem is we keep failing. And then another point I wanted to make is by Jesus' time, a lot of the stories we read in the gospel when Jesus comes along is that there are these people called the Pharisees. Have you heard of them? Yeah. So the Pharisees were the experts in the law. Okay, and so they were the religious. There's a word called zealot, which means a really passionate religious person, and they believed that it was kind of their job to judge who was and wasn't following the law. That sounds kind of tricky, does it? Because who would you think should be judging who doesn't follow the law?
Not people.
Right, God, exactly. But they took it upon themselves to decide who was and was not following the law. And I wanted to use an example. There's an example of keeping the Sabbath holy. So the Pharisees were really strict about what you could do on Sundays, or actually it was Saturday back then. The Jewish tradition, the Sabbath day is Saturday. And so there's a lot of tradition about don't work, don't plow your fields, don't go to the grocery store, don't do modern things, don't. It depends on how observant Jewish people are, whether they do that or not. But back then, the Pharisees were very militant about people who were doing things on the Sabbath. And they would go around policing people. And the rules were very, very difficult. And they weren't the rules that were in the Bible. They were these made up rules by the Pharisees. For example, if your donkey fell into a hole on your farm on a Saturday, on the Sabbath, could you get your donkey out? Your donkey is your way of life. It helps you farm, helps you get your food to the market and things like that. Could you get your donkey? Maybe you had a broken leg. Could you help it? And the Pharisee says, no, that's work. You're doing work. If you lift the donkey out of a hole, you've done work, and that is against God's law.
You would also be murdering the donkey.
The donkey fell in the hole by itself. Okay?
Oh, okay.
Or here's another rule that I've heard. I should check with a rabbi maybe on this, but I heard that if you're out in the field, you're not working because you can't be working on the Sabbath. But if you're just maybe you're walking to synagogue, you're walking to or just enjoying nature or something like that, and you spit. People spat a lot back then. If your spit hit a rock, that's okay because it just splats on the rock. But if your spit hit the dirt, and the dirt, because the dirt moves, well, that's work. That's sin. Spitting on the rock, okay. Spitting in the dirt, sin.
What?
Yeah.
So what if you dropped a thing on if you drop something, would you not be able to pick it up?
Things like that. So again,
That's so dumb.
remember what these laws are for? Our relationship with God and our relationship with each other. When we get to Jesus' time, the Pharisees are constantly trying to rat out Jesus because he keeps doing things on the Sabbath, like healing people. They try to catch him on numerous times when he goes out and he heals. He goes out and he gives sermons and he heals people. And the Pharisees are saying he's sinning because he's healing people on the day that God told us to rest. See, again, it's a little worse than the spitting thing, right? It's the idea that are you kind of losing track of what the laws are about? I mean, that's what Jesus kind of told the Pharisees back. And Jesus was angry at very few people in the Gospels, very angry at the Pharisees because he said the Pharisees were using God's law to harm people. We're purposefully misinterpreting God's law to give them power to harm people. Yep.
So, they were going around and on Saturdays trying to make people stop doing stuff. Wasn't that work to try to?
Oh, but they were holy. See, they sort of set themselves apart as the special God police.
Jesus is holy, so take that.
Well,
Well,
but
they
when
didn't know
yeah,
that.
right. So I'm being a little facetious, but when I say they were holy, they considered themselves above all that, and they were sort of God's police. Because I mean, you know, when you see a police car speed by to go to the scene of a crime or something, well, they think I'm fine speeding. I can break this law because I am doing the better good. The Pharisees believed that too. That they were working on the Sabbath, but it was for God's work. It was a better purpose. Yes, of course. All right. So again, now we have people in Jesus' time that are using God's laws to harm other people. Jesus hated that. He did not like that at all. Go. Nope. Okay. So when Jesus saw these things happening and so remember, we said Jesus was God's rescue plan. Okay. So God knows that we're struggling with these laws and struggling to have this relationship with him in our hearts, and because the laws are difficult and all this. So Jesus is the rescue plan. He sends Jesus to help us understand, A, how to live and be in relationship with each other and with God, and B, what the law really means. And so I've pulled a couple examples. We're kind of running out of time, so I was going to hope to read these out of the Bible, but we won't do that right now. Basically, in the Gospel of Matthew, I've got 3 examples. One is having Jesus saying, as part of one of his sermons, he said, people are saying that I've come here to get rid of the laws. And that sounds kind of, oh, wow, yeah, I don't want to do all these laws anymore because they're hard. But Jesus says, no, I've come to fulfill these laws, which I think means a couple things. It means that Jesus is here to mend our relationship with God and to show us how to live. I mean, I think Jesus lived in his life according to the laws, but the root of the laws, right? The laws that mean be in good relationship with God and be in good relationship with each other. And so that's what we're going to get to here in a minute. In Matthew 7, he sort of gets to this golden rule. We've heard this, right? Do unto others the way that you want others to do unto you. Treat others the way you want to be treated. He says that in Matthew 7. And so you're getting to the hint of, oh, right, okay, I'm supposed to be in a relationship with other people. What's the best way to do that? And then finally, in Matthew 22, and we saw this in the video, Jesus says, and this, again, this is in one of the Pharisees trying to trap him. They're saying, Jesus, what do you think is the most important of all the 613 laws? And they're going, he's going to mess up because we've done a lot of study about this and we know the right answers. They thought they knew the right answers. And Jesus said, look, you need to first love God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. And the second is you need to love each other. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. And he says, all the law is based on those 2 things, which is kind of the simple thing from the beginning, right? It kind of gets us back to Genesis, where you only had to do one thing, go God's way instead of your own. That's all this is saying, is love God and love everyone else. Love your neighbor. And if it just simplifies it all. And Jesus is saying, he says, all the law depends. I think I've got it on the next slide. Maybe go over there. So all the law and the prophets, the prophecies that said God has a rescue plan for us. He hasn't given up because we can't follow the law. He's not given up on us. All the law and the prophecies depend on these 2 commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And then love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, this is the basis of all the law. If you, the Pharisees, or you, us here, are wondering what's the point of that, if you can't connect it back to one of these 2, then you're missing the point. And I think those 613 laws, if you read down them, some of them you go, oh yeah, don't murder, don't, those things. But some of them, like with the wool and the cloth, we kind of lost track of why is that? Maybe it meant something back in the olden day, 3, 4, 5,000 years ago. Maybe it meant something. Does it matter now? Now that we have Jesus kind of pointing us in this way, I wouldn't tell your Jewish friends that it doesn't matter. Maybe they have an understanding that I don't have. But as Christians, we believe that Jesus Christ has fulfilled those laws for us, and all we need to do is this. We love God and love our neighbors. Those are the laws that we're commanded to do now. The 10 Commandments still valid because those are all part of this. a lot of the 613 laws, they still kind of make sense because they're rooted in this. But if we do these things, we know how to cook shellfish now. We know how to cook pork now. I think depending on your faith, you could decide that those are still important things to observe. But Jesus kind of says, if you're not getting this, then you're missing the point. Where am I? Am I at the end? Okay, that's the last slide. And we're at 8:23. Any other questions? So in the first book, the last gospel, the Gospel of John, John starts off again with a poem. He starts off with this poem that says, I can read it. The Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, this capital W word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God from the very beginning. Any hint who that might be? It's Jesus, but it's kind of a strange time, isn't it? Because we think of Jesus being born 2,000 years ago. So if he was born, wait, he was with God? He is God? Again, you're interpreting. I love it. You're interpreting poetry. Perfect. Through him, all things were made. Through Jesus, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and in that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. Beautiful poetry. This word, the word, okay, that's from a Greek word called logos, Logos.
I know what that means.
What does it mean?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
I took the Greek. Like, I know there's logos. There's like information.
You're right on this. You're right on this.
Because I know there's logos, pathos.
Yeah. So information, logic. It's kind of this is the root word of logic. Okay, right? It is translatable as a word, which is what the Bible, what most of our translations do, is they say in the beginning was the word. But it also means the logic, the way, the law. It's as if Jesus' life lived out this. And that's, so we have, Jesus came for two purposes, I believe, and we'll talk about, the forgiveness of sins. He was crucified because the consequence of sin is what? So death has to happen. All right. So we're going to get to that when we get to Jesus. I'm not going to spoil the ending for that. But the other part is to show us how to live. Jesus could have been born and died and fulfilled that purpose. But his real purpose, one of his real purposes on earth, was to be the logic, the way, the information, the way to live out the law. And we believe, and Jesus was saying, when I'm here to fulfill the law, we believe that Jesus lived out the law. Jesus lived in this perfect relationship with God and a perfect relationship with each other, with others. And if we study that, if we look at the lessons that Jesus taught, at the way that Jesus lived his life, as every interaction that Jesus had with other people, his sermons, we'll understand, we can begin to understand how we're supposed to live ourselves. And when we do that properly, then we're back, we're reconciling to where we were supposed to be. That's what Jesus meant when he said, I'm fulfilling the law. I believe that. So we've got 4 minutes left. We can, if anybody has any questions. All right, I appreciate your active responses, your engagement. If you think of other questions, bring them next week. I would love to get deeper into this. Next week lesson is, do you know what it is? I don't know what it is. I'm sorry. I'm going to be here as much as I can. And my next lesson I'm teaching is about prayer, but I think it might be Jesus. We might be up to we'll do 2 lessons on Jesus about how he lived his life and what happened with his death. All right. There's some games over here. If anybody wants to play a game for 4 or 5 minutes before your folks show up, and we're done. Thanks a lot. Mm-hmm.